Okay, we have two topics in this next lesson: abstract expressionism and color field painting. Now, this presentation was put together by Haley Mooney, and she did a very visually beautiful presentation here. But what I'm going to do is only present the abstract expressionism part, and then I'm going to cease this screencast. And in your assignment, I will be posting an old screencast that I have for color field painting. So you'll actually get two separate screencasts for this lesson. It'll just keep things a little bit easier for me, and so I'm not repeating things I've already done. But I will also post Haley's presentation because she has put down really wonderful information for you that's very accurate, and you're going to want to use it to reference for your graphic notes. Okay, for abstract expressionism, guys, we are really making a big geographical shift. And we are now going to start looking at the center of the art world, officially now being in the United States, and specifically New York City. So we've done some traveling around, remember when Greece and Rome was kind of the center of all the artistic movements during the Renaissance. And then we had some shifting up to Paris, and Paris became the Mecca for the art world. And now we're making a very official leap across the ocean, and now we are in the current kind of Mecca for the art world, New York City. Okay, abstract expressionism. The characteristics for this movement is in ways very similar to the expressionism movement. We're going to be kind of seeing some of those same characteristics, and there is kind of one big difference that we will get to, but I want you just to kind of refresh your brain about expressionism. We talked about Vasily Kandinsky, remember, and he did his interpretations, his compositions of, kind of interpreting music, right? Or what a musical composition would visually look like. And he used, lines and shapes and colors to kind of emulate that rhythm. And it was very non-objective. And then we also had Max Ernst, and we talked about Max Ernst kind of being on the cusp of symbolism and expressionism, and we really can look at these artists and knowing that they've straddled more than one movement at the same time. And I know that gets confusing, but we're talking about movements that overlap each other or are completely functioning simultaneously because, one school of thought of what art should be could coexist with somebody's, opposing opinion or style or school of art. So I know that it can get very confusing. But also I want you to try to remember that Self-Portrait of a Soldier by Kirchner, that expression as an art piece, because I feel like we're going to be able to see some relationship to abstract expressionism. But here are some of the differences, okay? First of all, we're talking about the origin, like I said, in New York City, and we are around the 1940s to 50s, okay? This is a post-World War II art movement, and again, if you think about that, the society, after post-war was a very emotional time. It's a very hopeful time as well, but it really kind of rejuvenates your artist, your literary artists, your musicians, your poets, your artists. So, you usually have big fluxes of art movements that, tend to not only develop after post-war time, but really kind of just like, explode as well. So we have post-war, Second World War is when we'll see this abstract expressionism really kind of take off. The actual name of the movement came from the forms themselves, and we're going to see a form of expression here that is not just in the subject matter. And here's where that major difference comes between expressionism and abstract expressionism. Expressionism really expressed, right, the artist's feelings. It was really about the artist having the freedom to work with their innermost feelings and almost use art as like an expressive therapy, but more in concept and subject matter. Now we have abstract expressionists who continue that, okay, continue to express themselves in subject matter, but take it a step further. And the step further is the actual physical act of painting becomes expressionistic. Okay, that's the big difference. That's the major change or the extension of expressionism or the reinvention of it, however you want to label it, that's going to be our biggest difference. We're working abstractly, but remember we talked about abstraction being a spectrum, okay, from, it being kind of slightly abstract from the real recognizable object to being so abstract that we almost get non-objective and, we can only recognize just shapes and lines and things like that. So it's a spectrum. You're going to see a variety of spectrum, but it is more abstract than not. Okay, so you're going to be able to recognize a lot of what the subject matter is, but you're going to also be able to notice that it's been completely simplified. We are not trying to look at things that are realistic or photorealistic at all. Again, abstract expressionism is not just about the finished product, what you're conveying, what the artist is expressing, but it is about the process of painting, the vigor of the hand, the movement of the body when you are physically applying paint to the canvas. And I know that seems really odd, but that's, what this movement was about. It was about reinventing kind of the application of paint, how paint is laid on the canvas and how that then looks. What is the end result? How can we notice the feeling of the artist when the artist was actually physically painting it? Okay, so it becomes a little bit less conceptual and becomes more of a tactile process. Okay, so again, that is the biggest difference here. Is definitely a huge avant-garde movement. I told you we were going to hear that term a lot, and here it is again. So again, avant-garde meaning, art for art's sake. It's artists, taking control of their own investigations of art. It's not being dictated. Artists kind of get to experiment and dictate these, different styles and schools of, artistic theory. Okay. The art during this movement are definitely expressions of the self, meaning the artist, from emotions and universal themes. They were really heavily influenced by surrealism. The other characteristic of abstract expressionism, which kind of goes, it makes sense because this is really about, the physicalness of painting, but you're going to see paintings on a monumental scale. We're not talking, canvases that are 12 by 24 inches. We are talking canvases that are 6 by 9 feet. Okay. And again, they needed to be larger because the artist is physically using their bodies to lay paint on canvas. Okay. It's not just about, the precision of the hand anymore. It's about encompassing, the entire body to lay your paint down. And everything I'm talking about here is summed up in one term, which is, I think, the most important term that you're going to need for this movement, and that's called action painting. So paint that is not just brushed on with your very traditional paintbrush or palette knife anymore, but artists during the abstract expressionism movement were looking for other ways to lay paint on the canvas. And they did this because they wanted to really try to incorporate more emotion and kind of a fieriness to their paintings, that they felt they were limited if they were just using these traditional tools. So they really looked towards non-traditional ways to get paint onto a canvas, because it changed the look of the entire painting, and it also, like I said, changed the process of getting paint onto the canvas. So this is an example that is not part of our image set, and I'm very happy that she included this artwork. This is actually artist Jackson Pollock. I think she mistakenly put Jason Pollock, but that's okay. But Jackson Pollock was really kind of one of the key leaders of this movement, and he completely encompasses and embodies everything that I'm trying to explain about this movement. So we are talking abstract art here, which, like Kandinsky, okay, if you think about Vasily Kandinsky's, I mean, these are very similar. They're abstract to the point that they are non-objective, okay? We really are not trying to make out any sort of recognizable form here. But what his paintings are evidence of is that action painting, okay? So his canvases would be absolutely huge. They would be, some of them would be like 10 feet by, 13 feet. And what he would do is he would lay the canvas on a floor, like in a large, warehouse space. And in order to have like really good perspective of his super humongous large painting, he would climb a ladder, and that would allow him an aerial perspective so he could see the entire painting. And then he would apply the paint by pouring it on there, or by using a broom, with the long handle to brush it on there. Or he would take sticks and, kind of dip it into the paint, and then let the paint drip from the stick, in like a fine line. And he would layer and layer and layer and use all these different techniques of application. And because he was working so large, what you have to understand is he had to paint with his whole body. If he wanted to make, a large circle on the canvas, it wasn't just taking a paintbrush and twirling his wrist. He had to take, a broom, and he had to spin his whole body around the canvas. And it became this, physical, almost dance that, had to happen in order for the paint to get onto this canvas and to fill the canvas. He had to lay low and climb high. He had to, completely physically move around the canvas from corner to corner to get every spot. So that is really the essence of action painting, involving your whole body to get the paint on the paper. And that was the expression part. Okay, you're definitely left with an image that that executes and captures all of his movements. Because now that I've explained that to you, now that you can look at this painting and know that it might be 10 by 13 feet, now you can look at every single line and try to imagine his body creating that line, and try to imagine where one line starts and one line ends. And it may have taken him 6 physical steps to make that line. And now when you are looking at his artwork, hopefully you are picturing him moving through this super humongous canvas and almost visualizing, a choreography. And that's the term abstract expressionism. That's the term of action painting. And that's how artists were now expressing themselves through paint. And this is actually Jackson Pollock's partner, who was also a painter. And, they kind of both studied abstract expressionism, working on monumental scale. And their styles were, slightly different, both, very non-objective. But you can see that they're both kind of investigating the same schools of thought. So this is Lee Krasner, and this one is titled Another Storm. All right, but now we get to the artwork that AP Art History has for us in this subject matter, and it's image number 145. It's titled Women One, and it's by artist William de Kooning. This was from 1950 to 1952. It is an oil on canvas, and it's currently located at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Okay, so in terms of content, remember I said we're not always going to be non-objective, okay, and we're on a spectrum. We will always be abstract for sure, but we don't always have to be non-objective. So in terms of content, we have a woman who's known to have her great fierce teeth. So if you look closely at her face, you can really see these markings of teeth here. She has very huge eyes, and the first reaction is that it's aggressive, and that's the point. William de Kooning really wanted to kind of emulate that aggressive feel to this painting. We have a blank stare. She's not looking directly at the viewer, just past the viewer. We have her in an environment that's completely ambiguous. It's unnecessary to the information of the painting. It's vague. It's unimportant. This one in particular was influenced by pinup girls and their poses, their sexualization, their, kind of very made up faces with really heavy, thick lipstick, their poses, their grins, their mascara, their eyeliner. So this particular painting is inspired by that traditional pinup girl look. Again, abstracted, severely. This is a very large painting. It's monumental. It's pretty much life size. It's about 6 feet tall. It completely fills the canvas. You notice the subject matter is from top to bottom, completely fills it, slightly off-centered. The smile is influenced by pinup girls and advertisement girls. And so specifically These were girls that were, selling the Camel cigarettes. They were from ads selling the Camel cigarette. In terms of form, okay, here's where abstract expressionism comes in and its specific characteristics. We have action painting here, where we have slashes of paint on the canvas. When you look at how this paint is applied to the canvas, you get an aggressive feeling. You can visualize that, it was not carefully laid down or even traditionally laid down, but slapped down, smeared down, that you can imagine basically the action of the artist putting this paint on the canvas, okay? We have extremely jagged lines that create an overpowering image. The smile, though, interesting enough, the actual smile, the actual teeth, is a magazine cutout, okay? So everything is a painting except that collaged part right there. We have very thick lines. We have thick and thin lines, so we have that feeling of, mark making, and we have that kind of mark making is extremely dominant throughout the whole painting. So you're going to see, if you can kind of take notice to these black outlines, and then but we also have mark making that's happening with when you lay down paint and you kind of scratch through it, whether it be with a stick or the opposite end of the paintbrush, like the paintbrush handle. That's what I mean by mark making. You can see drips from the paint. You can just see the remnants of the marks that the hand makes, okay? You have very quick brush strokes. Again, you're not getting the feeling that this is a tedious painting, that it's a painting that was carefully applied. That defeats the entire purpose, the entire kind of essence of abstract expressionism. Nothing. It should be kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? It should be a spontaneous, there we go, very spontaneous movement from the artist. So not, overanalyzed, not perfected, just very quick and kind of, working more with the subconscious, okay? You're going to have lots and lots of layers of paint as well. What we have here is still a limited color palette of pinks, orange, and yellows, creating some of those flesh tones with some blacks and whites that smear together on the canvas to create a lot of your gray tones. We talked about parts of it being scraped through and scraped down and then even repainted and then scraped off and repainted. So you have a lot of kind of going back and reworking the area. And like I said, this is 6 feet high by 5 feet wide. In terms of context, so it's important to know for this painting, this William de Kooning, is that this is actually part of a series. Okay, so this is one painting of a series, and this is part of his, his message, his commentary about their satires on women who appear in advertisements. Okay, and so, and actually, they're just, the whole entire series are just kind of satirical and commentaries of women in general, women throughout history. But this one in specific is just about women in advertisement. Okay, sorry, I wanted to make that clear. The smile is influenced again by the ads of women selling Camel cigarettes. There's really kind of an evil to that William de Kooning is trying to portray here. He's definitely trying to also hit the mark on, using women to sell products by enlarging the breasts and really kind of working with that made up face, the heavy mascara, the large, big, like doe eyes, and, the other parts of her being insignificant. Again, this was a series of 6 women, and it was influenced by, a wide variety of women in history, from, goddesses to pinup girls. This series took about 2 years to complete. It's They're all human figures, but they are all equally abstracted. They're all equally incorporating the style of action painting. And again, its main commentary is about, the sexualizing of women. And so that's kind of the point of this series. So there's an image down here that shows you some of the paintings in his series. Again, they're all very large scale. They're all painted with the same style, but each one of them are emulating a different woman throughout history. So the function of this is, I think, well said here. She captured a quote by de Kooning. It says, "Beauty becomes petulant to me. I like the grotesque. It's more joyous." So, again, it's that reestablishing of the, aesthetic, that we have the freedom to be attracted to kind of our own aesthetics. And oftentimes aesthetics is not just how things look, but how we relate to them through emotion and through expression. The innovation for this movement is definitely, guys, the act of the painting. Okay, so if you can hold on to that and really be able to discuss that and understand that that's the newness of this movement, you're going to be okay. I think it's also very important to also remember that a lot of movements, are rebuttals or rejections to other movements. And so if you think about all of the movements that we talked about prior to this, outside of Harlem Renaissance and Mexican muralists, we were talking about like the De Still movement, and we were talking about, international style of architecture. And so if you remember, those movements were all about this kind of stillness and this universal art language that was trying to be established. And so in order to make this universal art language, you had to take out all of the commentaries, all of the emotion, all of the artist expression, and just make it about elements and principles. Well, clearly, this is a reaction to those kind of modern art movements and that modern art type of thinking. That minimalism and simplicity is not where it's at. These were a group of artists that wanted to get back to expression, to putting feeling in painting, to be able to have subject matters that express something about society or politics or whatever it may be, that the artist was a voice and not just a designer. And so hopefully you are kind of recognizing that this is a pushback to that, modern art movement. Okay. She compared it to Olympia, which I thought was a really great comparison, because Olympia was also about the sexualization of women. But more so, what I really liked is she connected that cold blank stare, which I think is really great, that she was able to recognize that, even though we're talking 2 completely different styles. Olympia really kind of is a very recognizable form, just only minutely abstracted or flattened. Really, she's not totally abstracted, but just kind of flattened. And here we have a very abstracted female form, but yet we're able to still make the same connection with that gaze. So that kind of does it for abstract expressionism. Like I said, I'm going to stop this screencast and then go ahead and post an older screencast I have about color field painting.